Mexico has crowned a new golden triangle of fentanyl and drug trafficking. Over 90% of fentanyl seized by Mexican officials comes from these three states: Baja California, Sinaloa, and Sonora.
The Golden Triangle in Mexico, this region has become the central hub for fentanyl and firearms trafficking.
America. What if I told you that more than 90% of Mexico's fentanyl seizures trace back to just 3 states, and that half of all fentanyl crossing into our country is flowing through Arizona? What would you say if you learned that while deadly synthetic drugs pour north, powerful weapons are moving south, fueling cartel violence on both sides of the border? Parents are losing children to overdoses, families in Mexico are burying loved ones killed by cartel guns, and our border is caught in the middle of this deadly exchange. This is the new golden triangle of fentanyl trafficking: Baja California, Sinaloa, and Sonora, and it is America's drug pipeline. Before we move on, your single subscribe click powers the hard work that goes into every video here. Let's break it down: the rise of this deadly trade, its shocking statistics, and how U.S. leadership and law enforcement are working to stop it. The story begins with a revelation that should concern every American family. Mexican authorities confirmed that more than 92% of fentanyl seized inside their country comes from just 3 states: Baja California, Sinaloa, and Sonora. This new golden triangle is no longer about heroin fields or marijuana crops. It is a synthetic drug empire built around chemical labs, hidden factories, and smuggling routes designed to funnel poison into American communities. These states give cartels direct access to Pacific ports where precursor chemicals arrive from China, and that global supply chain feeds directly into the U.S. crisis. The numbers from Customs and Border Protection are just as alarming. Roughly half of all fentanyl seized on the southern border is intercepted not in remote deserts, but through legal ports of entry in Arizona. Think about that. One state, Arizona, now accounts for half of the fentanyl poisoning American neighborhoods. At the same time, firearms trafficking is running in the opposite direction. In just 7 months, 57% of firearms recovered in Mexico were traced to purchases made in the United States less than a year earlier, many of them in Arizona. This is not coincidence. It is a deadly exchange. Fentanyl flows north, guns flow south, and both nations pay with blood. Recent joint operations exposed the sophistication of these cartels. In Sonora, Mexican authorities, with U.S. intelligence support, seized AK-47s, more than 3,000 rounds of ammunition, tactical gear, and even live mortar grenades inside cartel stash houses. The fact that mortars are now in cartel arsenals shows how militarized these groups have become. Even more disturbing, one of the weapons seizures involved a 16-year-old American recruited to smuggle firearms across the border for the cartel. This is no longer just a cartel problem. It's reaching into American communities, drawing our youth into criminal networks, and exploiting weak border controls to fuel violence. The human cost of this golden triangle is devastating. On the Mexican side, the homicide rate stands at 24 per 100,000 people annually, among the highest in the world. 70% of those murders are committed with firearms, and 2/3 of the weapons at crime scenes are traced back to U.S. sources. On the American side, the overdose rate now exceeds 21 per 100,000, with fentanyl the leading cause. Some states, like West Virginia, record overdose rates that rival Mexico's homicide numbers. That means whether you're in a small American town or a Mexican border city, the death rate is the same: one side killed by bullets, the other side poisoned by synthetic drugs. This cycle feeds on itself. Fentanyl moves north into U.S. cities. Americans buy and overdose at record level. The cash flows back to Mexico, where cartels buy weapons from Arizona gun shops. Those weapons fuel murders, intimidation, and cartel control, which then allows more fentanyl production. It is a deadly loop, an economic engine built on destruction. The Sinaloa Cartel dominates this trade, not just because of geography, but because of decades of infrastructure. They have built supply lines from Chinese chemical producers to Pacific ports, smuggling routes through Arizona, and distribution networks across the United States. Their experience and logistics allow them to flood the market with fentanyl pills at an industrial scale. What makes this new golden triangle even more dangerous than the old drug corridors is the nature of synthetic drugs themselves. Heroin and marijuana relied on large fields and visible crops. Fentanyl can be produced in small labs, hidden in warehouses or rural houses, with chemicals imported in containers. A single kilogram of fentanyl precursor can be turned into thousands of deadly pills. This means cartels can produce enormous quantities with minimal space, making it harder for authorities to locate production sites. Even more troubling, recent government data shows that seizures of fentanyl have fallen, yet there has been no decline in U.S. overdose deaths or in the street price of fentanyl. That suggests that while authorities are intercepting shipments, even more fentanyl is slipping through undetected. Cartels may have become more efficient at concealing loads through ports of entry, or they may simply be producing so much that seizures are a manageable loss to them. Either way, the threat is growing. The Trump administration recognized the scale of this crisis and responded by designating 6 Mexican organized crime groups, including the Sinaloa Cartel, as foreign terrorist organizations. This designation raises the stake. Anyone providing material support from weapons traffickers to financial facilitators can be prosecuted under terrorism statutes, facing far harsher penalties. It also empowers law enforcement to treat cartel crimes not just as smuggling, but as acts of terrorism against the American people. This shift reflects reality. Cartels are waging economic warfare by poisoning our streets and arming themselves for violent control. On the ground, ICE, Customs and Border Protection, and the Department of Justice are working around the clock to disrupt this pipeline. Operations at Arizona ports are intercepting drugs hidden in vehicles, commercial shipments, and even carried by couriers. In Mexico, joint task forces are raiding labs and seizing weapons, though corruption inside local governments remains a constant obstacle. The concentration of fentanyl seizures in Baja, Sinaloa, and Sonora reveals just how centralized the production has become. These are no longer scattered networks. They are industrial operations with the capacity to destabilize entire regions. The broader impact goes beyond law enforcement and healthcare. The economic cost is staggering. In the U.S., hospitals are overwhelmed with overdose cases. Law enforcement resources are stretched, and communities are losing workers to addiction and death. In Mexico, violence devastates tourism, local businesses, and family life. Yet the cartels are making billions. They are exploiting weaknesses in both nations to turn human suffering into profit. For ordinary families, the consequences are heartbreaking. American parents discover a child lost to a counterfeit pill laced with fentanyl. Mexican mothers bury sons killed in cartel gunfights, armed with American rifles. Small towns in Arizona face both overdose deaths and the violence of smuggling routes. This is why officials describe the Golden Triangle not just as a border problem, but as a regional crisis. The death pipeline connects 2 nations in tragedy, and fighting it requires cooperation at every level: local, national, and international. The Sinaloa Cartel's message is clear: profit at any cost, human life be damned. But America's response must be just as clear: justice, accountability, and protection of our citizens. That means stronger border enforcement, tougher penalties for traffickers, greater intelligence sharing, and unwavering support for ICE and law enforcement officers, risking their lives to keep drugs and guns from crossing our borders. The new Golden Triangle shows us how organized crime has adapted in the age of synthetic drugs. With 92% of Mexico's fentanyl tied to 3 states and half of it entering through Arizona, America cannot afford to ignore this crisis. The cycle of fentanyl north and guns south is killing families in both nations, and only strong law enforcement can break it. ICE, Border Patrol, and U.S. prosecutors are on the front lines, fighting a cartel empire armed with billions of dollars and ruthless tactics. Their mission is nothing less than saving American lives.